Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hi, Paul. This is our first podcast of 2019, and I want to wish you a happy 2019, and especially to all our listeners, have a happy new year. You know, this time of year, most everyone will be blogging and podcasting in some form on some kind of New Year's resolutions or New Year's goals. And as much distaste as I have for the idea of New Year's resolutions, mostly because they rarely make any difference in your life, I think the next chapter, by its name, would be remiss if we fail to address the subject. I think the bulk of my reluctance to embrace the notion of New Year's resolutions has mostly to do with the idea that these goals are most often about accomplishments that may or may not have anything to do with internal realities like character or personal identity issues. Basically, what I'm saying is that with New Year's resolutions, we can fall into a trap of focusing on what we do rather than who we are. Today, my conversation is with my good friend Terry Hershey, who has made the who you are question the focus of his vocation. As an avid reader, author, renowned public speaker, and life coach, Terry is as close to an expert on this subject as anyone I know. So let's get right into it. Let's bring Terry on to enlighten us on this most important subject of what I'm calling identity processes over New Year's resolutions. So, Hirsch, what's up, man?
Charles, how are you?
I am fine.
You want enlightenment? All right, you ready for this?
Really? Now you can do this live over the air?
I can't. This is because your paradigm is for internal, external, right?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, so that's the paradigm shift, and that's a good one. I'll say something that takes you and I back to our days when we did church work. We were familiar with the people who did that. They were called the Pharisees. Everything they did was external based, not internal based.
Right.
And so you're talking about that paradigm. All right. So a guy who is a high-powered guy in a company meets with the CEO. The CEO depends on this guy. I mean, this guy is important to the company, necessary, essential. So he's in for a meeting. He says, "I need you," but there's just one problem with this guy. When he gets stressed out and nervous in a meeting, he pees his pants, and that's just not acceptable. So the CEO is, and there he is in this special meeting, telling him this is what I expect from you this year. He's telling this guy, I mean, we need you, and he pees his pants. So the CEO just chews him out. Said, what in the heck is going on? We have got to get you got to be better than this. We've got to fix this. I'll tell you what, I'm going to spare no expense. We're going to send you to the best therapists there are. We're going to get you through this. We're going to fix this. Okay. So 1 month later, he comes back and meets with the CEO, and the CEO's thinking, thank God. And they start the meeting, and the guy pees his pants. And the CEO says, what the heck? I just spent thousands of dollars so that you'd get over this. And the guy said, well, I did. I just don't feel bad about it anymore.
Well, ironically, that has a lot to do with what we're going to be talking about today.
It has everything to do with it. We're talking different languages about what needed to change.
We really are talking different languages. And as I noted in the introduction, I have a problem with New Year's resolutions, and mostly because they focus on peeing your pants. They focus on external ego building and not so much on interior character and virtue building. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. G.K. Chesterton, who's one of my favorites, said that the key for New Year's is the object is not that we should just have a new year relative to a list to check off. It's that we should continue to develop a new soul. I mean, I like that.
I like that too.
But the thing about that is that now you're dealing with stuff that's not measurable in the way that we like to measure things.
Right. It's not a SMART goal.
In other words, yes. In other words, I can't just check it off. Okay, done. I did that. I'm gonna lose X pounds, or I'm gonna and you know what? There's nothing wrong with losing X number of pounds. There's nothing wrong with it at all. But one of the things that makes resolutions difficult, external ones, New Year's resolutions, is that our reason for doing them is predicated on something that's not internally motivated. In other words, I'm doing this for someone else. I'm doing this in order to look a certain way for people who are looking at me. I'm doing it because of the stress of needing to be more impressive. In other words, there's nothing internal it doesn't grow from anything internal.
Well, let me counter that a bit and say it doesn't grow from the right place internally, because I think what it can also grow from is an incomplete or overused ego, over-needed ego, that I need to do this to satisfy not only other people, but to satisfy myself, that I am a worthy individual. And that ego-driven, that's as much, maybe, as you're saying, driven by other people, but maybe it is all about acceptance, but it's also about personal acceptance, don't you think?
Yeah, wholehearted. Anthony DeMello is, one of my favorite writers, because he's a storyteller, and he talks about that too. And that at his core, he loved, and so at his core, he wanted to know what it was he was supposed to do to be loved, and therefore to be okay, and therefore to be comfortable with that self. And what he realized was that he was afraid to fall back on the fact that he was already loved before this process began. In other words, this wasn't something he had to achieve in order for it to happen.
It was already there.
It was already there. In other words, he didn't just let that be.
But he couldn't embrace it for some reason?
That's it. And that's the thing is, and so it's the question, because people will come to me, and you've had this happen too, if they want insight, because there's certain areas of their life they want to change. They want to quit peeing their pants in public, whatever it is. Okay, fine. But it's an interesting question to start with. Before we do all that changing, are you willing to be loved for being this you?
Yeah, and even more difficult if we peel the layers of that onion, is what I want to talk about later, is determining who you are, who is the real you, who is the you to be loved, because we have had to put on so many glittering images that we have lost track of who we are, that we really don't even know who we are because we have so many facades.
You're pulling from one of my favorite novels, Susan Howage.
Oh, I know.
Glittering Images.
Yeah, it is. It's one of my favorites too.
Yeah. Anyway, so keep going.
Okay, so there's a lot of ideas I want to touch on in our 45 minutes today, and I think we can get through it, but we'll see. But I want to begin with a topic not generally discussed with regard to resolutions or goal setting, and that is, what about talking about process goals in lieu of tangible and measurable goals, especially if we are focusing on the internal and not external goals. In other words, what I'd like to discuss a bit is what you can be doing rather than what you can accomplish. Does that make any sense to you?
Sure.
Tell me why.
Well, because as soon as as soon as you make something a destination or an endeavor you have to arrive at, then along the way, let me tell it to you from another angle, because this is my stock sermon that I preach. So I'm on the boat, the ferry boat. You know, I live on an island. It's a ferry boat. So I'm out there eavesdropping with the couple. You might have heard this story before, but it's an older couple, and I'm eavesdropping because I love to eavesdrop. Because if I don't eavesdrop, I don't have any sermon material. So I'm eavesdropping, and it's it's a spectacular day, and we're headed toward the Olympic Mountains, which is to the west. It's pretty beautiful. So this older couple, and they were, I don't know what their age was, 70s, I'm guessing, but so and I can tell just from the conversation, they've never been on a boat, a ferry boat, in their life. They've never been to Pacific Northwest and Seattle in their life. They've never seen what they're seeing in their life, and this is a special trip. And so he's getting all gooey about how amazing this is. And she's saying, use your words. And he said, this is the best. This is the best. And she said, what? And he says, everything about this is spectacular. The mountains and the trees and the water. This is spectacular. And then he says, we should have done this sooner. And she's like, what? And then he talks about all the times they were going to take a trip like that and didn't take it, right? And so it's depressing. It's just depressing as hell, because they're telling all the stories that all of us can relate to. In other words, certain destinations that they weren't able to check off. Remember?
Right.
In other words, they're basically going through all the New Year's resolutions of the last few years and saying, well, missed that one, missed that one, missed that one, missed that one. And so I had to intervene,
Oh, you had to be, yeah.
So I said, dude, with all due respect, if you don't shut up, you're going to miss this trip too.
Did you really? You didn't really do that.
I just said, just enjoy it while you're here. And so that's your thing about process. That's the process part. In other words, he was so focused on where he had to get and what he missed before, he wasn't even. And so this is the same with anybody. I mean, think about it. Think about. we always go back to sports too. But if you're good at your craft, you have to work out every day, right? Those workouts aren't fun. There's not a lot of fun with some of that. But the process part is that. But yes, you can be present there. You can be fully alive there.
See, I think that's an important word that you just said there. In the process has to do with presence, and has to do with
100%.
And if you're in an external goal, a SMART goal, a measurable goal, there is not a presence. There is always a looking forward to what is going to be accomplished in the future, not what you are enjoying or experiencing at this moment.
That would be absolutely correct. Yes. In other words, if it's not the process part, if it has to do with some destination or endeavor I need to arrive at, then I am just ipso facto outside of the present moment. I'm not here.
So therefore, virtue or I think you could even say value-oriented goals are process by nature. They are not measurable and achievable in that way. You can measure progress. Say I'm better at.
Or the verb learn. Here's
that's I love. I was going to use that later. That's perfect.
Or here's how I've grown. Or here's what I've discovered. Or here's ways that I have allowed myself to be a better self. Or I found my better angels. All those things.
That is, I was just speaking with a server at the spot where I worked the podcast before, and she was talking about one of the things that she wants to do is a process goal, and that is learning how to, she's a young girl, she's in her early 20s, and learning how to love herself more and figuring I can be much more selfless. I can be much more available to the world if I'm available to myself, if I take care of myself. And, you know, so few people, even though, you know, Terry, you and I have talked about this for decades, and it's still, you know, and especially I think I'm afraid for the millennials because they are so externally driven. There is, you know, from what I've read and from what I understand, there's not a lot of internal drive, but I don't know if it's just millennials. I think it has to do with us as a culture.
Well, I think it's culture too, because our technological world has externalized most all of our attention span.
Oh, so like you were saying earlier, the cell phone.
Externalized. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Our attention span is externalized, but not just span. Our attention itself, and in fact, internal. Here's you ready for this? Because we've done studies on this. As Pascal said, one of the problems is that a man, meaning man or woman, doesn't know how to sit quietly in his own room.
Right.
In other words, I don't know how to be with this me. It doesn't really matter whether I know which part of me is real or not real. I don't even know how to be with it, period. So this is interesting and so we live in a world that stimulates and bombards us to stay away from that. Because sitting there, that's going to think, oh my God, what do I do now? Human beings, they put them in a place where they're just going to have to sit and be. And we're so unused to that. Human beings would rather, there's a place that you can do a thing for a stimulation, electronic stimulation, just to have a jolt of something. Would rather do that than sit still.
Absolutely. You know, I was talking on a podcast that we will publish later, and I brought up the idea that capitalism has, I don't want to say matured, but it has turned into a dogma rather than an economic system. You know, it's a good economic system, but it's a dogma of achievement and goal-oriented, getting better, and it truly, I think, has become the dogma of the United States. And instead of an economic system, we derive our value from our success in a capitalistic economy.
You mean that we find our own value from that?
Yeah, from
measuring it dollar-wise?
Dollar-wise, career-wise, you know, title-wise, all of those sorts of things. But they do end up in dollars. You know, somehow they do end up in dollars. Mm-hmm. One of the things I was thinking about, Terry, and I was thinking about process goals, and my wife got me thinking about this morning, and she's reading a book that I can't recall, but it did talk about process goals over measurable goals. And I was thinking that process goals are much harder to articulate. How do you articulate or how you plan process goals? But also, they are so much easier to manage because not only do they embrace failure, they in some ways actually depend upon failure as a key learning experience. I think that is all too often normal resolutions leave little room for failure and therefore cause one to give up on the goal altogether when failure is a part of the learning process.
100% true. Yeah, 100% true. Yeah, and I told you the story about Zach, didn't I? When he learned to ride a bike, when he was whatever age he was.
Yeah, a long time ago. Tell it again.
Yeah, well, it's not because I travel, so you miss in this. You know, as a dad, you miss stuff when you're on the road. So you come home, and Dad, I finally learned how to ride my bike today. I said, "That's great, Zach. Tell me about it. He said, well, I started by falling down a lot. That's as much a part of as much a part of the process of riding the bike as staying upright.
That is, and that is because in character and virtue goals, there is no room for not failure. We they're so
for which kind of goals?
Character and virtue goals. There's no room for we are going to fail at them.
Correct.
It is just. It's.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, there's no room for saying we cannot fail.
Right. We cannot, and so therefore that gives some room, that gives some hope that the failure is indeed a learning experience, and it's helping me to develop that character, that virtue, that value, whatever it is. It's helping me develop that a lot more.
So this is the Wright brothers. They took a long time to learn to fly that plane. Years.
Yeah.
And as they're working on this thing, and they went out to where'd they fly it from? I forget the name of the beach.
Kitty Hawk.
Kitty Hawk. Yeah, thanks. Anyway, as they'd go out there to practice, to rehearse, whatever they were doing, the Wright brothers took 5 sets of extra parts every day they rehearsed. Do you know why? Because they knew they'd have at least 5 crashes.
Yeah.
I love that story. In other words, taking the extra parts were a part of the process for them.
To find out what, in other words, to find out what won't work.
Correct. And
instead of finding out what would work, what won't work, and then you discover what won't work, and it narrows down the list to what will work.
Mm-hmm. Because it's interesting, because if we go back to the verb to learn, just tell me, because we say, we'll even start by saying, how was the day? Well, as a disaster, failed miserably. We don't even start with, well, what did I learn today? Tell me where I grew it. Tell me where I stretched today. Tell me something new that was added to my character today.
Yeah, those discussions aren't even allowed.
You know what? Why not actually have a paradigm change? Why not quit the question as what did you accomplish today? Why does that have to be our question?
Instead of what did you learn today?
Yeah, about your character. Tell me why you stretched your character today.
Because I think the difficulty is most people are not thinking in that vein. I don't think we're really thinking about character as much.
But that's how we start thinking about it.
Yeah,
that's how we start thinking about it. In other words, make that, because it's the same thing with any of the ways that we invite one another to have conversation and to engage, is I can be invited in a new way.
I just wrote in a blog last week. And you're very familiar with my wife and I, our retreat between Christmas and New Year's, and which we spend a couple of days away, and we actually evaluate our marriage. And when we talk about what kind of husband was I, what kind of wife was I, and we don't say, what can I do better this year? Because that just leads you down a funky track. And it can be an argumentative track, is that what would you like from me this year? What could I do this year to be a better husband? It's just a different take on the question, but it solidifies it to where it's very actionable, but they are always character goals. They're always about how you treat me, how I treat you, how we respond to one another, how we love one another, what are we doing. They're always in the character. Rarely are they in, budgets and accomplishable goals where we never talk about how much money are we going to make or what are we, what are our business goals or personal goals. It's always about who we are as people together and how we can be better husbands and wives and be better parents, and how we can raise Austin. Even though he's 26 years old, you never quit being a parent.
Your son's 26?
Yeah.
Wow.
Unreal, huh?
Uh-huh. We're gonna pause this blog for 1 minute just to feel how old we're getting.
Yeah, but I'm still young. I don't hit old age until next year, when I hit 70. That 70 starts counting.
That's when you start counting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's old age. That's not old age. Old age is at 80.
Well, the David Brooks book, The Road to Character, right?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about that. That was my next question.
Because your conversation about you and Pam, and that's actually what I like about that is that you make space to have conversations about the right kind of things. That's the key. Because we don't instinctively do that, so we need to make space for that.
And I must say, let me interrupt just a bit before you get into it. I must say, it's not easy. This year, we had a wonderful year, so this year was easy. I mean, we had a year of comfort together and of pleasure together, and it was just an extremely brilliant year. But there have been years, Terry, where those conversations end in tears. And those conversations end in, are we right together? Do we need to separate? Are we, we've had difficult questions like that have emerged in the last decade. And through work and commitment and acceptance and who knows what all, grace, we have emerged just, a wonderful couple. I just can't wait to be with my wife. I love being with my wife. But that wasn't always the story. So I just don't want our listeners to think this is a bed of roses. This can be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So go on with your statement if you can remember what it was.
I can't. One of my New Year's resolutions is to have I think it has something to do with a better memory.
Yeah, I'm taking my wife. They gave me that, that 23andMe. Have you heard about that?
No.
Where it does DNA testing, and it will tell you
correct.
your entire heritage. But then it also tells your proclivity to certain diseases like dementia and all of that sort of things. Do you have the genes? And I don't know that I want to find that out.
Oh, I was going to tell you about the David Brooks book.
You know what I want you to tell me about that is after a break, because that is my next question on my list here. So let's take a quick break, and then we're going to get to David Brooks. Hi, this is Charlie Hedges, and you're listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie. And I have my good friend and special guest, Terry Hershey, as we talk about a whole different paradigm of New Year's resolutions. Rather than goals of losing weight and making money and doing whatever, we're talking about character and virtue goals. We're talking about process-oriented goals, not SMART goals, which are, I can't even remember what SMART is, specific and measurable and all of that stuff. And it is really, these are the kinds of goals that I think I'm fully convinced that as I get older that they're the most important goals. And I want to get on that subject with a book that Terry read, and he told me about, that I have not read. It's by David Brooks, titled The Road to Character. And in that book, Brooks talks about eulogy virtues as opposed to resume virtues. And Terry, I'd like you to describe that distinction for us.
Well, the resume virtues, and earlier I talked about the fact that we need to have, we need to ask different questions, because Plato said, "Whatever is honored will be cultivated." And if the only conversation, now you and I have conversations that go to a much deeper level when we personally have them, but if the only conversation I'm having with you is what did you accomplish today, then that's what will be cultivated in terms of measuring what matters to you and me. Well, resume virtues, it's interesting, because the resume virtues, and we even tell our young people, our kids, this is what you put on your resume, and it has to do with dollars or money or what you've been able to earn, or what kind of status you have, and your status has to do with what level you've been able to achieve, and so we honor certain things, and we teach them to cultivate that. The very first time I did a resume, I was working for a man named Lyman Coleman. Lyman Coleman had a company called Serendipity, and he did small groups. And I'm just a young punk out of seminary, but I had this remarkable resume already. I really did. I was going to be impressive. And then, of course, at the bottom of resumes back in the day, I don't remember now, but you used to just put one personal anecdote, right? Everything above that was all the stuff that made me somebody. Resume virtues. And at the bottom, I put that from the time I was a teenager, I was a hod carrier for my father, who was a brick mason. Lyman said to me, "Do you know, if you'd just shown me that, I would have hired you."
But because of the other stuff, I'm not going to hire you?
No. He offered me a job anyway. He said, "I didn't need all that other stuff. I'm not hiring you for anything above that line."
Yeah, but how many employers are like that?
But that's the whole point is, Charlie, we have to allow ourselves to create space. Okay, you can use that same logic by saying how many couples are going to do what you guys did. Well, they can. Why can't they start?
Yeah.
Why can't we honor something? And so the eulogy virtues are things like kindness and bravery and honesty and faithfulness. And so...
And service.
Why not? And service. And why not? Why not in... Because we teach kids how to answer certain questions when they go in for job interviews. Why can't it be about that? Tell me a kind deed that was done to you or that you did this last week. Holy crap. Because I can tell you right now, and you know just as well as I do, that any workplace benefits from people being kind to each other.
Yeah. That's where I take after it was 2 or 3 years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, was the last time I read the Bible in its entirety. And I don't know what translation I used, maybe the New Century Bible. But, there's those famous words by Jesus that love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And I took from that is to honor God. And then love is such a 25-cent word. I mean, it means something different to everybody. And so what does that mean? To what degree? And I just came to the conclusion of just be nice. Just be nice. And everybody understands just be nice. And if people are just nice, it makes all the difference in the world. And you can do that daily with everybody, with the grocery clerk, with your family, with the contacts that you have. Just be a nice person. Don't be an embittered person and a careless person. And of course, I have a little bit of a knee-jerk to nice. I agree with you, but it's the kind. The Dalai Lama said that my religion is kindness. I like that. Yeah, I like kindness too. Kindness and nice to me are synonymous. I saw like a
like, I don't know, like an exchange of some angry words in a Costco parking lot this year during the Christmas time. I don't know what happens. We get testy with each other. We do during this time of good cheer. This guy's shouting at the son. I mean, just shouting at him, you know. And then the guy says, "Hey, don't be an ass. It's Christmas, for Christ's sake." And I thought, you know what? That actually would make a good card.
That would be a good card. Don't be an ass. It's Christmas, for Christ's sake. And literally, for Christ's sake.
Literally. That's the whole point is literally. It made sense.
Yeah. Okay, you know what I want to do? We've been a bit philosophical, which you and I can do. And I'm sure our listeners have gleaned what we're saying, because I think it's pretty clear. It's not so inaccessible to understand. But I think I want to try to get a little bit more tangible, since we have been philosophical, and I want to ask I think this is a very difficult question. How can a person define virtue or components of character that have some personal meaning to them? How can I do that?
I mean, I am always asking the question: Does this make space for my better angels? That's always what I ask. And I can tell when something is toxic, because my better angels go and hide. And the things we just talked about as eulogy virtues, the kindness and bravery and courage. So the antithesis of all those things, being small or being a bully or being bitter or any of those things. In other words, I can see what the flip side of all those are. And I can see, and I go back to the honoring thing. The most tangible thing I ask people is, tell me what you could honor today. Tell me how you could honor it today. Tell me where you can honor it today.
Can you tell me what you mean by honor?
Honor means I make a specific choice to do it.
Okay.
Okay, I'll give you a very specific illustration of honoring. I take a walk every day now. I walk an hour and 20 minutes. That's good for me.
That's unusual for you.
It would, in fact, anybody who knows me who's listening to this are going, "Is that Terry talking?" So I've been doing it for a few months now. But here's the point: is as a New Year's resolution, I want to walk. Fine. Honor means I make space for it. I choose to do it. I don't afterwards. I don't say, "Good, thank God I achieved that." No, I make space for that. I make space. That's what honoring means. Honor. What you and Pam do every one year, that's honoring something. Okay, Charlie, let's you and I get together. Good. Next time I'm in town, get together. Fine. Those are good words. Honor means when I'm there, I call you, I come pick you up, and we go out for dinner. That's honoring. Honor means I make space for it.
So Claire, let me get personal and clarify something for me, if you can. I have been going through, it's not a depression. I don't know what it is. My psychiatrist says it's a chemical imbalance, and I think he's right. I don't think it's an environmental, psychological thing. It's something is not wiring right, and I wake up with lethargy and not really feeling like I want to get at a couple of things I need to do. I try to delay. As a matter of fact, my happiest part of the day is when I get to go to bed at night, because nothing is expected of me then. What kinds of things would you suggest I honor in order to serve as sort of a buffer to that? Does anything come to your mind?
Yeah, because the list of just going to bed, that's not the only thing on that list.
Such as?
I'm talking about hydrating your soul, that hydrates your soul. There are other
right, you had mentioned that term before.
And you have moments where you, even in this endeavor, this time period of so-called, whatever you want to call it.
Lethargy.
Okay, lethargy. There are moments when you smile and it does your heart good, even in the middle of that lethargy.
Right.
There are moments of gladness, even in the middle of that lethargy. There are moments when you can look back and say, okay, that was not as difficult as I thought. There are these kind of moments. Not to mention the fact you get your butt out of a chair, and then you get in your car, and then you put your butt in another chair and do the show you're doing right now. So the point is that there are all kinds of things that you honor, that you know, even in the middle of lethargy, you would do the show because you're honoring something that you know pays off for you. And I don't mean pay off money-wise. I mean it pays off for you because I know what feeds you, Charlie.
You know, you're alluding to a subject that I think is important in this, and that's personal accountability. And that we are accountable for our good times and our not so good times, and even in tragic situations we can assume some form of accountability. Now I'm sure there's exceptions, but we are accountable for how we maintain those and how we manage those. And it's a big word for me, and I am thinking how much more I need to be accountable and do things. I know as you know, I have a proclivity every now and then. You know, I'll have my annual depression, and the way to work out of a depression is to just simply do something, whether you feel like it or not. That's accountability. Right. You just get up and do it.
Right. That is, yeah, and that's also honoring.
That is, yeah. Yeah,
exactly
honoring.
It's honoring, and the accountability, the element of that I add to accountability is that it involves other people. In other words, that's the relational component of it. Because I always say to people when they're going through anything, even if we're going to New Year's resolutions, I say that's fine that list. But who are your people? Who are your people?
Yeah, you brought up an important point there, because we've not talked about relationship, and we are relational beings, and it is how we treat other people and how we're treated by other people, and we're treated by other people in the way that we treat them.
Right. And the people are the ones who hear what we want to honor, and they're going to be our cheerleaders and the ones who are going to say, dude, you know, you're going to miss this trip too. Yeah.
So I have one final question, and we've kind of addressed it a bit, but I want to close with this because it's the tactical question that I really would like to help our listeners, because I feel, because I felt it so much in my own life, what are my personal values and virtues, and I have, as I've pondered the subject, I'm considering sort of a high correlation between values and virtues. Either way, it's tricky to determine your personal values or virtues instead of repeating the Boy Scout motto or some other list of virtues that are part of an organization, an institution, a political affiliation. For instance, I know for you that authenticity is essential.
Correct.
And it's an important virtue that you embrace. Maybe you could explain to us how you came to that conclusion that authenticity was so important.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, that's the better angel part. Barbara Brown Taylor, who's a great preacher, and
right.
She was invited to preach someplace, so she said, you know, what's the top? Because they weren't preaching from the lectionary, so she said, what do I preach on? And he said, why don't you just tell us what's saving you today? I liked that.
Yeah.
What's saving you today? And so basically she's talking about here are the using your thing about values. Here are the values that are required for me to stay upright, and not just upright and morally upright. I mean to stay human.
Yeah, you notice I've refrained from using the words morality because those are
right.
Those are such loaded terms, and I don't think they're necessarily helpful because they're so taken by you know, every organization owns them and they all have different concepts or constructs of what morality may be.
Right.
But I like that. You know what I like about the Barbara Brown Taylor quote of being asked what's saving you today? There's an important assumption there, is that you require saving.
Yes.
You know, I don't think everybody has that assumption that they require saving every day.
Well, I mean, saving in the sense that when I stumble and fall and become less, or do not honor that better angel and give in to whatever is toxic, it is destructive. And it is destructive not just to me, it's destructive to the relationships I have and to the world around me.
Do you feel it's toxic at the time, or are you subverted by your desires that are not, you don't fit into your virtues?
Oh, we do our best to not be aware. We do our darndest to not be aware
or rationalize.
I mean, that's the whole point. That's why alcohol was created. So I don't have to be aware.
Yeah, that's
Everybody has the capacity to honor these places. Everyone does.
How do we? You know, I'm not convinced that we have convinced everybody. How do we convince people of the? Let's go to the David Brooks definition, which just the words meant a lot to me. The eulogy virtues versus resume virtues. I think that's just such a grand way of putting it. It's even better than legacy, because legacy can have such a self-grandiose interpretation if you're not careful.
Mm-hmm. I don't get why is convinced so important to you? Why does someone have to be convinced? I'll tell you what, you honor it, give yourself the permission to honor it. You don't need to be convinced. You just live it. Just live it. The convinced part, see, now that's all cerebral. That's like something I have to lock into up in my head and say, okay, I get it. No, just do a Mother Teresa. Your thing about just be kind. Whatever it is, whatever that value is, do that today.
That's really good advice. Be who you are. Be kind, and don't worry necessarily about your impact. What is more important is that you're living more authentically with your core.
Yeah, and there's a visceral reaction when there's not authenticity, and you know, anyone knows this. You can tell when you're living outside your authentic core. You can tell when you're being petty, or you're being small, or you're being any of the things that take you away from your best self.
Yeah, I'm reminded of, boy, you know, I've got to be careful because we're nearing an end, and I'm starting in the rambling process. But I'm reminded of Richard Rohr's Falling Upward in the first and second half of life, and honoring eulogy virtues are really a second half of life phenomenon.
Yeah, Yeah, that's a perfect illustration of what he does with that book.
Because of that, because before we're honoring our capitalistic ego needs, which is I don't want to downgrade those for people who are in that state, because there's a time of life that is important, and Richard Ware makes a good case for that there's a time of life, but that is the first half of life. That's what you do in your first half, and then your second half, you make a complete changeover.
I agree.
Well, Terry, as always, it's delightful talking to you. You have such brilliant insight, and it's so real. That's the thing that I like talking to you about, is that you live it to the best of your ability, and without a lot of care. Is it acceptable to other people, rather than is it true to you? Is it authentic? Is it the way you have been created? And are you being kind to other people?
Yeah.
I admire that about you. So, buddy, I want to thank you for spending so much time with me here today, and as always. And I want to encourage all of the listeners to check out your always inspirational post called Sabbath Moment, which can be found at terryhershey.com. I read it regularly, and it's fun, well written, and always inspiring. And I want to thank all our listeners for tuning in to the next chapter with Charlie, and be sure to check us out at our website, thenextchapter.life. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off for now, and see you next week.